Jonah Chapter 1 is where we are. So if you'd stand with me, please, in reverence to the reading of God's Word. Notice verse 1. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah rose up to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. So he went down to Joppa, found a ship which was going to Tarshish, paid the fare, and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. The Lord hurled a great wind on the sea, and there was a great storm on the sea, so that the ship was about to break up. And then the sailors became afraid, and every man cried to his God, and they threw the cargo which was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone below into the hold of the ship, lain down, and fallen sound asleep. So the captain approached him and said, How is it that you're sleeping? Get up, call on your God. Perhaps your God will be concerned about us, so that we will not perish. Each man said to his mate, Come, let us cast lots, so we may learn on whose account this calamity has struck us. So they cast lots, and the lots fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, Tell us now, on whose account has this calamity struck us? What is your occupation, and where did you come from? What is your country? From what people are you? And he said to them, I'm a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. Then the men became extremely frightened, and they said to him, How could you do this? For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. So they said to him, What should we do to you, that the sea may become calm for us? For the sea was becoming increasingly stormy. And he said to them, Pick me up and throw me into the sea, and then the sea will become calm for you, for I know that on account of me this great storm has come upon you. However, the men rowed desperately to return to the land, but they could not, for the sea was becoming even stormier against them. Then they called on the Lord and said, We earnestly pray, O Lord, do not let us perish on account of this man's life, and do not put innocent blood on us, for you, O Lord, have done as you have pleased. So they picked up Jonah, threw him into the sea, and the sea stopped its raging. Then the men feared the Lord greatly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. Let's pray. Father, what a moving story. And yet, Lord, we know because of Jesus' words that it was an actual story that occurred. This was a moment in a man's life. Father, it's such a reminder of our own lives and how easily we determine to run from you. And so, Father, I pray that as we start today, you give us the courage to take that first step. The first step back to you. But Lord, as we go through this series, I pray that we might deal with some of those deep hurts and pains that are holding us back, that cause us to run from you instead of running to you. So Lord, teach us today. Let your word be preeminent. We give you praise in Jesus' name. Amen. You may be seated. Why do we make the conscious choice to run from God? I guess we're ignorant. Okay. As we read Jonah chapter 1, this was not Jonah thinking he was running from God. This was Jonah making a clear decision to run from God. So how would he do that? Well, some of the more obvious answers include personal prejudice, anger against God, or a fear of what he's asking us to do. See, those answers remind us that running from God normally happens because of a deep hurt that we might not even recognize. And so studying this book of Jonah gives us the perfect opportunity to take the plunge into our own hearts and minds to help us see what really causes us to run from God. Jonah is considered a minor prophet. It's not because he's not as important as Isaiah or Jeremiah or Ezekiel or Daniel. It's not because he's not that important. It's just that his book was shorter than the others. And it fits perfectly in with the other minor prophets that we find in the Old Testament. These events that we're reading about happened about 760 BC. We know that Jonah was an Israelite, according to 2 Kings 14:25. But the setting for this book is a city called Nineveh, which was the capital city of Assyria at that time. Nineveh was a massive city. It was 60 miles wide and held over 600,000 people. This was a huge group of people, a large city that God was calling Jonah to. And for the most part, none of them worshipped the God of Israel. The Syrians were known as fierce warriors who really liked to torture their enemies. They were known for their brutality, which is possibly why Jonah had such a problem with this. Because of what we read in the scriptures, we know where Jonah's family lived, and we also know that the Assyrians attacked some of those cities and possibly attacked and even tortured some of Jonah's family as well. If so, then we see Jonah's problem or his prejudice is familial, meaning it's all about his family and therefore hard to overcome. And we're eventually going to see Jonah's anger against God and how he turns that anger against God. And it's possible that the prophet experienced some fear over going to this dangerous city to preach the good news. In other words, he could most likely check all three boxes of why he was running from God. But you see, here's where the rubber hits the road. Here's where the tires begin to squeal. God knew all about Jonah's prejudice, his anger, and his fear. And yet he still called him to go to Nineveh. You see, God knew about all of those issues that Jonah might have, and he still called the prophet to go to Nineveh. And listen, he knows your prejudice. And he knows your anger. And he knows your fear. And yet he's still calling you to something as well. Now the easy answer seems to be that we just run from him. The fact is, God wants to use you to do something special in his kingdom. Something that's bigger than you are. So, why are you running from God? Why are you running from God? Notice two things about Jonah here when we're answering that question. One, Jonah's problems keep him running from God. Look again at verses 1 and 2. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, "Arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness has come up before me." So those problems, prejudice, anger, and fear keep many people on the run. They dictate what we can and cannot do, who we can and cannot talk to, and where we can and cannot go. And Jonah, as Jonah heard God's call, he could not fathom the possibility of going to the wicked city like Nineveh and tell them about the God of Israel. It literally made no sense to him. Now consider this. Our culture has deemed God's word nonsensical and has determined that it has no value in these modern times. So as we choose to live out God's word in our everyday lives, and people laugh and make fun of us. Why? Because it doesn't make sense to them. It just doesn't make sense. Think about it this way. If the scriptures are not a part of your life, if you're not walking with Jesus, then why would a couple date without having sex? I mean, if you're not living according to the scripture, why would you not? What would be your reason? Sorry, get stuck. Why would a friend stick closer than a brother even when everyone else turns against him? And why would a teen or young adult choose to keep his or her mind pure when porn is so easily accessible? You see, in a person's mind who does not have God or have His Word, none of that makes sense. Why not do those things? It's only when we get into God's Word and begin to see what He says that we understand how bad those choices really are. In today's culture, none of those choices make any sense, but they all honor God and fulfill His plan for our lives. So people's problems then dictate everything that they do. They dictate how they choose to live their lives. Unless we serve a higher power. Unless we serve Jesus Christ. You see, because when we serve Him, He shows us how to live. And then gives us courage to live as He's called us to. So, who or what are you serving today? Think about it. Who or what are you serving? Are you serving your problems? Or are you serving that higher power that we know is Jesus? You see, that answer will determine how far you will run from God. Because our problems keep us running from God. But notice not only Jonah's problems, but then also Jonah's plan keeps him running from God. Look there, verse 3. But Jonah rose up to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. So he went down to Joppa, found a ship which was going to Tarshish, paid the fare, and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. So God calls Jonah and tells him what He wants him to do. And what's Jonah's first response? It's to create a whole new life plan. Right? It's to change everything that he's known to this point. So Jonah creates a new life plan that includes a sudden, unexplained trip to Tarshish, which just happens to be in the exact opposite direction from Nineveh. You see, he planned this. He made a plan. He actually knows without a doubt that he is running from God. He is literally planning his escape. I suspect that several people in this room know exactly what was happening in Jonah's heart and mind. Because if God has called you to preach or serve in a foreign country, if He has called you to some kind of ministry and you're unwilling to listen, then you know what's happening with Jonah right here. You understand what Jonah is doing. If you know that God wants you to say no to a specific sin that has plagued you for years and you're unwilling to obey, then you know what Jonah is feeling in these moments. And if you know that God is telling you to abandon a friendship or maybe a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship that's leading you away from Him and you're unwilling to listen, then you know what's happening to Jonah. You understand what he is going through. You see, running from God does not mean that you don't love Him, that you're not a Christ follower. It doesn't mean that at all. But it does tell you that something is more important in your life than He is. Something is more important in your life than He is. See, when Jesus is our Lord, His Word is our only guide. This is what we live by. This is our bread every single day. And yet, when He is not, then there are lords in our lives that we follow completely. So who's the Lord of your life today? Could the answer tell you why you are running from God? Why are you running from God? Is it the problems that you have in life? Is it the plan that you've created or maybe recreated over time? Why are you running from God? But there's another question that this text gives us here, and it's this. Why would you stop your running? What is going to stop you from running from God? Now notice for Jonah that God can use a storm to stop you running. God can use a storm to stop your running. Look there at verse 4. The Lord hurled a great wind on the sea, and there was a great storm on the sea, so that the ship was about to break up. And then the sailors became afraid, and every man cried to his God, and they threw the cargo which was in the ship in the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone below into the hold of the ship, laid down, and fallen sound asleep. So the captain approached him and said, "How is it that you're sleeping? Get up, call on your God. Perhaps your God will be concerned about us, so that we will not perish." Now remember, Jonah knows that he's running from God. And God knows exactly what to do to get his attention. Now, do you believe that's true in your life? Does God know what needs to be done to get your attention? Jonah seems to prove that very clearly to us. He sends a great wind, which creates a huge storm that's strong enough to tear this boat apart. You see, it was an immediate response to Jonah's rebellion. But let me ask you, does God always act immediately when we rebel? Not always. Not always. Sometimes He actually lets us wander in our rebellion for a period of time, for a season in life. And when He waits to bring that storm, we go through life thinking we've run far enough and all is good. And maybe that's you today. Maybe you think, you know what? I know God called me to do this. God told me to do this. This is what I'm supposed to do. I don't want to do it. So I've run far enough that God's just going to leave me alone. Now understand. Sometimes He brings the storm immediately. Sometimes He waits for a season. But if you're running from God, a storm will come. It's just a reality that we must accept and understand. So we even think we see God's hand in certain parts of our lives as we are running from Him. And we try to convince ourselves that God has changed His mind. And that all is good now. That He no longer wants me to do what He called me to do. In truth, God's not forgotten. He hasn't changed His mind in the least. His plan is still intact, and He is calling you to stop running before He has to send a storm to draw you back to Himself. And folks, the storm was serious. These were seasoned sailors. And yet they were scared to death. And the captain can't find Jonah anywhere, and so he goes looking for him, and he finds him in the hull of the ship, and he found him sleeping. And I think it's amazing. What does he ask Jonah to do? First thing he asks him to do, when the storm is hit, the boat's about to fall apart, everyone's going to die. What's the first thing the heathen captain, asks Jonah to do? Pray. Call on your God. The first thing. That, by the way, is usually the last thing we do. But at this moment, the captain says to Jonah, "Get up and pray." But Jonah didn't need to pray. Because he already knew what was going on with the storm. He knew that Yahweh was stopping his run. Listen, if you're currently running from God, then you understand Jonah's situation. You get his inability to pray. And you get his intuitive understanding of God's message. You know because God is constantly talking to you. If you're running from Him, it's like every time I preach, you're like, does the man ever preach on anything else? Because it's all you hear. Every song we sing, it's like Pastor Dwayne just singing the same song over and over. Why? Because God's message is clear. And His plan for your life is very clear. And yet you are running from that plan. You're saying no. And God's saying, yes, I'm going to remind you. Every time you turn the radio on. Every time you talk to a friend. Every time you're going through life and you see a billboard. I'm going to remind you. I'm going to remind you that I have a plan for your life. See, that's how God works. All through life. It's a never-ending reminder of your rebellion. So God can use a storm to stop your running. But I want you to notice here as well that God can use a stone to stop your running. Notice there as we continue in verse 7. Each man had said to his mate, "Come, let us cast lots, so we may learn on whose account this calamity has struck us." So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. And they said to him, "Tell us all about yourself." Verse 9, he said to them, "I'm a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." So, again, the storm is serious. The men were praying to their God. Nothing was stopping what was going on. And so they said, you know what? Let's figure out who the problem is on this ship. Some of you are like, man, we need to do this at work tomorrow. Where's the problem here? Now, in those days, they would cast lots. Basically, lots, in our minds, would kind of be like dice, but in reality, they're probably just stones of some kind. And they would throw the stones up and let God, supposedly, direct them to who the problem was. Well, guess where those stones landed? They pointed right to one person, and his name was Jonah. You see, even with these heathen men, God could use the stone to stop him from running. You know, we know God can use a storm to stop us from running, but we also need to know that God can use a stone to stop our running. Those stones pointed directly to Jonah, and the men know who is responsible for this terrible storm. And when they hear that Jonah is running, they hear that the prophet is running from God, notice verse 10. Then the men became extremely frightened, and they said to him, "How could you do this?" For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. Think about, even in Jonah's running, who gets the most glory? God. Even as he runs, these men go, "How could you do this? We serve our God, but you serve the God." They understood his power. They understood what this meant, that Jonah was running from God. So even in Jonah's running, God received glory, because the people knew of his God and feared him. Now they asked the question, what can we do? Verse 11, so then what should we do to you that the sea may become calm for us? For the sea was becoming increasingly stormy. And he said to them, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea, and then the sea will become calm for you. For I know that on account of me this great storm has come upon you." Amazing, isn't it? Jonah knew why the storm was there. Now let me ask you, is your family going through a storm today and you know why? You know, you understand why they're suffering and why they're struggling and why they're hurting? It's because you have chosen to run from God. And that storm is affecting them. These sailors weren't running from God. They didn't even know God. They knew of him, but they didn't know him. And yet, they're suffering because of Jonah's decision to run. I think it's amazing that these men tried to fix the problem without throwing Jonah overboard. Notice there in verse 13, however, the men rowed desperately to return to the land, but they could not, for the sea was becoming even stormier against them. They gave it all they could. So then they asked God, please don't hold this against us. Please don't keep this storm coming. Please don't tear our boat apart, because we're going to throw your prophet overboard. We're going to throw him into the sea. Again, God's glory is here. We see it, him receiving glory from these men. And so what do? You probably can picture it. You've been to a swimming pool before. A couple of boys pick up one boy and they, whoa, whoo. There he goes. Now the beauty of that moment, and that's a scary moment, by the way. But the beauty of that moment is as soon as he hit the water, the storm stopped. Again, who got the glory? God. Even in Jonah's running from God, he still received all the glory. Jonah could have lied. He could have denied. but he knew God was not going to give up. The more he ran, the more storms and stones God would send his way. Now I want you to think about this. Jonah's willingness to confess what he had done. Confess to these men what he had done. And said to them, throw me overboard. Folks, that was Jonah's first step back to God. His first step back to God. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, if I take one step towards God, he's going to throw me in the sea. That's not good. Oh, but we'll see next week it really was good. Because not only do we see him on the boat here, next week we're going to see him in the belly. And we're going to understand what God did for Jonah. So I wonder, is that what God is asking of you today? Just take one step. Today, possibly that step is to walk right up to this altar and get on your knees before the Lord and just admit it. God, I've been running. I know it. You know it. Today I'm ready to stop. So here's the first step. Maybe you need to go to someone that's here in worship today, or maybe after worship you need to go find a person and take that first step because you know you've been running from God. Maybe in a relationship or a friendship or whatever it is, you take the first step. Maybe today you know without question that God's been calling you to be saved, for your life to be given to Him. You know, many times we think, well, Kevin, I'm coming to church. Isn't that enough? Oh, I so wish that was enough. Because this place would be packed if that's all we had to do. Folks, the reality is this. This church can't save you. This church can't get you to heaven one day. This church can't do that. We just did it. We just partook of the Lord's Supper. We remembered who has that. And His name is Jesus. Listen, if you've been running from Him, today I say to you, He is calling you home. He's calling you to come and say, yes, Lord, I want to be saved. I want my life to be changed for all eternity. And it could be that you know God's calling you to this church and you've been running from Him. If that's the case, will you take that first step today? That's what Jonah did. Is it time to stop?